Well, today we're in the town of Royal Tunbridge Wells, which is about 30 miles from London. And in history, this was a place where the royal would come to draw water from the spa. We're in a shop known as Upcountry, and it's packed full of antiques, both English and continental. Look at this armoire, a beautiful pine armoire. And the tag says that it's Danish, and actually it can be yours for about 1,200 pounds. But I know they'll negotiate. And over here, it's a nice farmhouse type of table. This is French, scrubbed pine. You can still feel the wear of the top. This can be yours for also 1,200 pounds. And if you like, you can even pick up the china. Now, this is an interesting piece. There's a little wooden latch, which allows a pair of the legs to swing around so that the top can flip down. It makes it very portable. And what it's for is wine tasting. You could take the table from vineyard to vineyard, set it up very quickly, and try out the wine. Oh, and look at this. All over Britain, I've been looking at pieces with these wormholes. Now, they tell me that the worms are not active, but that the wormholes add a lot of value to the piece. I also think it kind of adds a lot of character. Now, what I brought you to see is over here in the corner. It's just a tall plant stand. It has very delicately tapered legs, an intermediate shelf to hold it all together. Actually, put another plant right here. The rails are just thin pine that sit in mortises, and then, of course, a pine top, place to put your favorite Boston fern. What I like about it is that it's very simple, yet it's elegant, and I think it's going to be pretty easy to build. So maybe we'll do a couple. Well, here it is, our version of the antique plant stand. I made it out of pine like the one we saw at Upcountry Antiques, and I maintained the tapered leg. The only difference that I have is that the rail that supports the intermediate shelf is mortised into the leg instead of just nailed onto the inside. Now, before we get started today, I want to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, follow, and understand all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, to start our project today, I want to take this slab of what's called sugar pine that I picked up at my wood outlet and make some leg blanks. Now, it's a soft pine, even softer than the standard C or D select pine that we use on our projects. But it has a very fine grain. It doesn't have this coarse texture. It's very fine and straight, which makes it a good choice for a thin tapered leg. Now, what I have now are 4 blanks that are just a little less than 1 3/8 inches square. And what I want to do is run the pieces through my surface planer so that they end up being 1 1/4 inches square. So the idea is that all 4 pieces want to be exactly the same. So I'll make a pass on one edge, then turn it 90 degrees and make a pass on an adjacent edge on all 4 pieces before I change any setups. Now, on the first pass, I removed about 1/16 of an inch. Because this wood is so soft, I'm now going to be able to take it right to 1 1/4 inches and run the other 2 sides. Now, the standard way to taper a leg is to use one of these, a tapering jig. This is a homemade version. And what happens is when you place a piece of wood in it and keep the jig against the rip fence, as you push it through, it cuts at an angle, making the taper. But here I have a 50-inch leg, and I can't even get far enough back and have any kind of bearing on the rip fence. In fact, it would be pretty unsafe to even try it. So I guess it's time to build a jig for tapering longer legs. First thing I'm going to need is a piece of plywood. I always end up with these little strips of plywood from different projects, and I wonder why I save them. But on a day like today, this is where they come in handy. I'm going to cut a piece about 65 inches long. Now this board needs to be about 4 inches wide. Well, now a little layout. First I'm going to measure 49.5 inches down, which is the overall length of the leg, and square a line across. I'm going to come up to this end and measure down 5.5 inches. And that's the amount of the leg on the top that I don't want tapered. Put a line across there. Now we'll put a mark at 1.25 inches, the width of the blank as it stands now. And then down here at the line I already made, we're going to put a mark at 15/16. Now we'll just connect those 2 points with a straight edge. And take this scrap of plywood and fasten it right along the line. Now a little stop block down at the end against which the leg will rest. This little scrap of pine is really just a guard to keep the operator's fingers clear of the blade. Let me put one of the blanks on the jig to show you what I'm doing next. I'm going to put this scrap of plywood, which makes it even with the top of the blank, and then fasten this clamp to hold the blank when we push it through the saw. Now, to secure the top and bottom of the blank, especially ones that might have a little bit of a curve to them, I'm driving a 4-penny finish nail at the bottom. I'm just going to snip it off so a little sticks out and acts like a little point. And up at the top, I'm just going to put a little screw through, and the point that protrudes through the top will hold the blank. And now we'll give the jig a try. First, I'm going to take the blank and push it up against that bottom pin. Give it a little tap to set it. And up here on the top end, I'm just going to squeeze it down onto the point of that screw and tighten the clamp in the middle. I've installed a feather board on the table saw to hold the jig tightly against the rip fence, which is set at 4 inches. Okay, now I'm going to take the blank, turn it 90 degrees, reset it in the jig, and cut the adjacent side. Now the sawing operation leaves the edges a little bit rough, So I'll smooth those using my joiner. Now it's time to cut the legs to their final length. And if you look at the prototype, you notice that the leg flares out in this direction when you look at it from that side. And when you look at it from this side, it also flares out. So in order for the leg to sit flat on the floor and for the top shelf to sit flat on the leg, I need to make a compound cut. So I've set up my radial arm with the blade tipped at 5 degrees and the arm swung over at 5 degrees. I want to make sure that I hold the outside corner that's straight up against the rip fence. So I put an X mark on each side that's been tapered. We'll trim a little off the top, measure it for length, and cut the bottom. The final length of my leg is 49.5 inches. Next, I want to cut the mortises in the upper portion of the leg for the rails. The rails are a 1/2 inch thick, and they just slip into the mortises. To make the mortises, I'm going to use my router table. And I've set it up with a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit, and I've put a piece of tape on it for the leading edge and the following edge of the bit. In the sample, I can show you what happens. Always holding the straight edge of the leg against the fence, we'll make one mortise by starting on the end and running it through until the line on the layout aligns with the line on the table. For the adjacent mortise, I'm going to have to make a plunge cut, dropping it down so that I line with the front pencil mark and just push it through. Well, now with everything set up, we can run the legs. The next step is to make the mortises for these intermediate rails. And to do that, I've moved the fence back about 1/16 of an inch. And that's so the mortise will end up centered in the width of the leg at that point. The height is still the same. Now I have to keep in mind that the straight side of the leg will always be against the fence. I'll make a plunge cut and a mortise that'll end up about 1.25 inches long. Now, using a sharp chisel, I'm going to square up the bottom edge of all the mortises. The top rails are made from 1/2 inch thick stock, and I've ripped and jointed a piece to 4 inches wide. Now, I'm going to have to cut the ends of the rails at an angle, 5 degrees, which is also the angle of the flare on the legs. Now, the length of the rail measured at the shortest point, which is across the top, is 5 3/4 strong. Now, the lower rails are also 1/2 inch stock, except this time they're only 1 inch wide. Cut at the same 5-degree angle, 9 7/8 along the top edge. The next thing to work on is the lower shelf. It's made from 1/2 inch thick stock, and it has to be notched around the legs. So I've taken a piece and laid out each corner, clamped it in the bench, and now I'm just going to cut them with my little dovetailing saw. Well, now we can begin to assemble it. I'm going to apply a little bit of glue in all the mortises and some on the ends of all the rail pieces. Now, with any glue that's squeezed out, removed, I'm going to pin each of the joints with a 1-inch brad. Okay, now let's set this one aside to dry and build another one. Now, before I can attach the two subframes together, I'm going to have to clean this mortise out a little bit now, because the rail sticks in on the corner. So I'll clean that up with my utility knife and my chisel. With two frames pre-assembled and those mortises cleaned out, I can now start to put the entire piece together. Before I can attach the other pre-assembled frame, I want to put the lower shelf in. And when I made the mortises, I overcut them a bit so I would avoid having to square up another corner. And it really doesn't matter because the shelf is going to cover it. Now, this is the last chance to put this shelf in place. And what I have to do now is slip the other frame in, we'll clamp it and nail it together. Right, now to secure the shelf, I've just put one nail in each side, no glue. That way it can expand and contract a bit if it has to. And with that, I think we'll set it aside to dry and come back to it tomorrow to finish it up. Well, I got started this morning by taking this piece of stock and chamfering the edge using my joiner with the rip fence set at a 45-degree angle. And that's going to become this little molding that dresses up the top shelf. And I find that it's always easier and a lot safer to put the detail on the edge of the molding first and then cut out the smaller piece. It'll take 2 rip cuts to get the final piece of molding. The first one will be for the molding's thickness. And this final pass will give me the width. I've set my miter box at a 45-degree angle to cut all the pieces, and they'll be attached in place with some 1-inch brads. Well, now we'll make the top shelf. To ease the edges on my top shelf, I'm using my router, which I've equipped with a 1/4-inch rounding over bit, but I've only exposed a little bit of it below the table. Now, to secure the frame to the top shelf, I'm going to use a wedge that I've cut on each end at a 5-degree angle, because the rails also flare at a 5-degree angle. I've cut it a little bit long so that it will just wedge itself in there. Now, to actually secure the top, I'm going to use one 2-inch screw. Right in the middle. Now, what that does is secures the top shelf firmly to the base. yet it can still expand and contract with changes in moisture. Trying to make this new pine look like that country pine is a really thankless task. Even the pros over in England, who do it for a living, tell me that unless you're willing to take the piece and maybe dip it in a caustic solution and play around with a lot of different stains, it's still not going to come out looking like the antiques. So we're going to try a couple things of our own. Today I'm putting on a water-based stain. The color is called Spanish Oak. And I'm going to put it on with this foam brush to start, nice and even, and then take a rag and wipe off the excess. I'll do the whole piece, getting it as even as possible. After the stain was completely dry, I applied a coat of sanding sealer. And that's a good choice for the first coat because it fills the pores of the wood and it gives me a proper base for the final finished coat. I sanded everything with 220 grit sandpaper, and I filled the nail holes with this soft putty. Now, it comes in a whole range of colors, and I simply found the one that was closest to my stain color and filled the holes. Now, it's soft, and it won't fall out of the holes later on because it doesn't dry out. With everything tacked down or all the dust removed, I'm ready for the final coat, which will be a gloss polyurethane. It's a water base, so it dries fairly quickly. I'll put on one coat, let it set for about 20 minutes, give it a light sanding, and put on the final coat. And then it'll be ready to use. Hey, look at that. It works. And you know, I think we're getting real close with our combination of stains and polyurethanes to that English country pine look.
Norm's back with more new Yankee tricks after the break before the cutting-edge woodworker takes over at 2:30.